sharing their experience from tech leaders to tech leaders. This is CTO Talks.
Hello and welcome. This is Marcin Bulnowski, and I have a pleasure to host today Emanuele Sparvoli, straight from Dublin this time, Director of IT at Intercom. Hi, Emanuele.
Hi, how are you? Glad to be here.
Yeah, good to have you here. All right, so could you please introduce yourself, what your role is? I know that you have many hats, so maybe you can say briefly about all of them and something about the company, what it does for a living.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm the Director of IT at Intercom. Intercom is a customer service platform built for an AI-first world. And we actually combine the best of human interactions and AI interactions to create a wonderful customer experience. And we have around 25,000 customers, which means like a lot more people actually using us for customer service needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the first IT hire at Intercom. I joined in April 2016. And since then, of course, from zero, the IT group increased in size and in scope. And so right now I do IT operations, which is customer support and all the logistics that is included there, a bit of procurement, so both software and hardware. And then, of course, the main thing that I start since the start, which is like that IT infrastructure, which is corporate infrastructure, security, compliance. And on top of that, among other things I'm probably forgetting, we also own email deliverability in the company, both for the product and for the corporate environment, which is a whole thing by itself.
Okay, so I think it's another story on this show about a fast-growing company. And I assume your journey must have been incredibly interesting since you joined at the very beginning. Could you say a few words, how much is it different now from when you started, and what were the biggest challenges you faced on the way?
Yeah, by the way, I didn't join since the start.
I know.
When I joined, the company was already 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like a bit more than 100 employees at the time. There was an office in Dublin, one in San Francisco, but the thing that felt really like a small startup was that there was absolutely no IT function whatsoever. I think the CTO and some of the engineers were kind of like dabbling and fixing the Wi-Fi when it went down, and giving people laptops and trying to manage them, all Apple based, because like it's kind of easier. We can touch a bit. It was at the start was kind of easier to manage MacBooks instead of Windows machines. And so like I came in and as the first IT person, and the ask was like, okay, do IT because we don't know how to do it. And my experience when I joined, I already had like more than 20 years experience in the field. I worked for my own startup, small companies. I worked in China for a manufacturing company. It's like very different, mostly very corporate environment, right? But when I joined Intercom, I remember kind of the shock of how different it was. And I remember telling my wife after my first day, she asked me, how is it? And I said, like, well, it's like a Starbucks. There's a nice office, very nice place, and there's a coffee machine. There's a Wi-Fi that sometimes goes down, and a lot of people on their MacBooks, so drinking coffee. So yeah, it's like a Starbucks. And everybody's very relaxed. Even in my interview, I was just with jeans, yes, but with like a shirt, and I felt overdressed. It was a very relaxed environment, so that was really nice. And of course, so now, we are 1,000 people and we have 5 offices around the world. So like definitely the company grew very fast. And the biggest challenge for me was like, I could have easily came in and that's probably lost my job very fast. If I just came in and I say, okay, I'm going to do IT the way I know, which is like, I'm going to, deploy Active Directory, firewalls, ask people to use VPNs when they're home.
ITIL kind of processes.
Yeah, like ITIL is fine if you take some of the concepts and apply them. But it's mostly like the fixed perimeter-based IT infrastructure and security, that every corporation expects. Like before joining Intercom, my first job in Ireland was in online payments finance. So you can imagine PCI compliant, like a bank.
Yeah.
Basically. So very strict. But what I saw, and a lot of the emphasis, a lot of the principle was about like moving fast, breaking things, like so. If I implemented something like that, I realized very quickly that I would probably break the company. But they wouldn't allow me to break the company, but they would just tell me, you're not the right fit here, and say goodbye. And so I really tried to find like what was the best way to do it. And maybe I even moved a bit slow at the start because like I just need to figure out how to do IT. So at the start it was mostly like IT support. Because like, oh, there's an IT person now. The printer doesn't work. Oh, that socket, there's no power. Like, well, I'm not an electrician. But and at the time there wasn't really much in terms of like perimeterless infrastructure. I mean, there was a lot of theory. Some people already talking about it, and the Google with their Beyond Corp, framework. But really, like, wasn't the tools were not there unless you had incredible resources and you could build it.
Were you on the cloud back then?
Everything was on the cloud, and my idea was like, I don't want to build anything that is in the office. Like, I want to. My idea was like, I wasn't thinking about a pandemic. I was thinking about what happens if the building.
Yes,
and we all need to work from a different place, right?
PCP, disaster recovery.
Yeah, being very agile. Like how we make it easy to be agile and like not being worried about our infrastructure on-prem. And so like I just wanted the office to be good internet, good infrastructure, maybe for video conferencing, but don't depend on something that is deployed on a machine at the office. Like I just didn't want that. I felt that was the right way to go. Right? Like, I've always been passionate about security, so I knew all the concepts. I started as a system administrator. So like at the time, security for me, like at 90s, was like how secure is a server, like all these kind of things.
Actually, I had a similar experience. I was at high school doing my first script kiddie experience and then compiling the kernel with SE Linux.
Yeah, the thing is like I grew up, I got my first personal computer when I was 10. Commodore 64. And the meat that I had was like War Games, the movie, like and a lot of stories about Kevin Mitnick, this great hacker, So at the time, dial-up internet, like doing odd jobs to pay for it by myself, very expensive, and everybody wants to be an hacker, like so. We were like on IRC chats talking about doing this, doing that. So.
Although Kevin Mitnick was more of a social hacker than...
He was. Like, he actually wasn't technically incredibly strong. I mean, he knew what he was doing, but he really kind of introduced the concept of social engineering, which is very strong right now, Like, that's how you break perimeters or even cloud infrastructures.
And it's still a thing. Like, phishing is probably the biggest threat nowadays, right?
It is, yeah. And so, like, just to go back to that, I remember the first, there's a document that I wrote at the time that was called Device Trust at Intercom. And Device Trust is actually a component of Zero Trust framework, but I just didn't like the term Zero Trust because it has a very negative reception from people when you talk about Zero Trust. In reality, what Zero Trust says is just that nothing is trusted by default. So trust but verify, It's just that Zero Trust is a very good technical term to explain it. And they're actually not very new concept. I think in the middle of 1994, I remember came up in a thesis from someone. Like you can probably go fact check me on Wikipedia if you want. I don't remember the names.
We'll do that.
And I remember this guy, like in his thesis in IT security, he actually created the term Zero Trust. And then like there were several forums in the industry that started to talk about trust as a vulnerability, like if you just implicitly trust things, that's your vulnerability.
Or assume certain things are happening.
Yeah, because you're assuming. Like, and the idea was like how the corporations are working. We're assuming that everything is safe inside of their perimeter, inside of their environment, is like a snail, right? Like it's a very hard shell, but the core is soft.
And never like stress testing.
If you break the shell, then just it's very easy, right? And so like this idea that you should not assume that things are trusted by default just because they're inside your net. And but it took many years. It took like 15 years or so before actually Zero Trust started to be popular and implemented. And the big thing, I think, was first that in 2009, Google actually published a white paper on Beyond Trust, which was their way of implementing a Zero Trust architecture. And so like that became very popular. And then there were like several experts coming out saying like, we should apply Zero Trust concept to security. So like build it in a way that, we don't trust anything by default, we verify everything. And my idea was like, I'm going to move the perimeter to the cloud. So I'm going to be 100% SaaS-based, which was already one challenge because a lot of the technology just wasn't there. Like at the time, just to say something simple, like finance people that started to join Intercom because Intercom was expanding those functions, wanted to use Windows machines. And at the time, Microsoft didn't offer any way to manage Windows machines from the cloud. So you needed to have Active Directory on-prem, right? So it was very complex. Like, how do I do this? So it was a really, the industry kind of needed to catch up.
But I know that you usually federate the clouds.
Yeah, but you still need to have something on-prem.
Was there nothing at that time?
At the time, you couldn't even federate in Azure. Azure was still to come.
Okay.
We are talking 2016.
Okay, that must have been.
Azure was kind of in its infancy. Like now you have Intune, Azure AD. Like you can just use the cloud. You don't need anything on-prem. And when we were talking with Okta about Zero Trust, Device Trust, they were still not 100% ready. They had it for MacBooks because MacBooks not having an enterprise solution, when people started to think how we manage Apple devices, they immediately went to the cloud. So there was Jamf that was also used by Apple themselves, even today.
At iCloud, yeah.
Yeah, which is now Jamf at the start was like an on-prem solution. Then they went to the cloud. And in 2017, you could already buy their cloud solution. But historically, Apple just didn't have a directory. So they just assumed, okay, Jamf needs to be capable to manage MacBooks that are not in a directory, right? But for Windows, this concept was very...
So it wasn't Starbucks anymore.
That's the first thing that we did, actually. We purchased Jamf to manage the MacBooks. But Windows was still a problem, and there was still the thing like, how do I establish device trust, which is basically using the fact that the device is managed as a factor, as one of the authentication factors. And this didn't. We tried so many things. Like we built anything that you could imagine with the tools available. We even built Active Directory hosted in AWS. With a federated server locally, but there's a fundamental problem because Okta had a solution for device trust for that if you had that kind of infrastructure. But the fundamental problem was what happens if the laptop doesn't report into the infrastructure for 90 days, and that could happen actually because people will travel. Some people were working in an office where there was like IT. Like at the time, were just me and another engineer. So you can imagine. And we had like a small office in London, a small office in Chicago, absolutely no IT people there. Who's going to manage this kind of on-prem infrastructure? Like it's, we tried to play with VPNs as well, but then we were almost going to deploy it. But then we were sitting at the table and I was like, but this is basically just giving up on our idea to be 100% SaaS, 100% in the cloud. So we waited, we talked to Okta, and I remember like in August 2018, we were actually at the Okta office having one of their customer days, which is actually wonderful. Like you go and you sit for a full day with people from Okta.
But how about security?
What do you mean?
You let people like from outside the company in. They let actually the people.
Yeah, but it's a specific part made for visitors. So like it's separated. Like we're talking about physical security here, which is a whole other thing. But I can tell you that it's a separate part of their office.
Oh, okay.
Made just for this, and you're not like at their desk. They come in a room and they talk to you, but you can talk with product managers, with engineers, and tech sales. Basically, you can talk about whatever you want. And one of the things we were saying, we really like to have a full Zero Trust architecture at Intercom, but we need the device trust to be 100% cloud-based. So instead of being based on Active Directory, it needs to be based on an agent or on the fact that you can determine that the machine is managed. And I remember as whiteboarding how it should be based on an agent, etc. And finally, after a couple of years, they came out with a new version of the Okta platform, which is called the Okta Identity Engine, which actually does support that you deploy their agent, which is called Okta Verify. And you can use Okta Verify at the time of authentication to understand if the machine is managed or not, being it a MacBook or a Windows machine or a mobile phone even.
And these kinds of tools, they need to be quite low level in the OS operating system, right?
Well, not necessarily. All you need to do is deploying an agent. But of course, there's more infrastructure that you need to build. You need to have something to manage the machine. In the case of Microsoft Windows machines, you would use, if you want to be 100% cloud, you would use Azure AD and enroll them in Azure AD and have them managed in Intune, which is the platform that Microsoft uses. Which is funny enough, is the same name as the one that was on-prem before, but now it has a cloud version. And so, like, once the machine is managed, Okta Verify can detect that, and it's a bit more complex than what I'm describing. There's a lot of people still scratching their head about this, but I can tell you that our journey was very complex. We first deployed Okta and multi-factor authentication, which was already like a big barrier.
But there is a question that naturally comes to my mind, and I think it applies to most of the companies, especially scale-ups. So security, I would say for most people means procedures, processes, constraints, limitations, like no admin access for developers that people really hate, like literally hate, and many people quit their jobs due to that. And the question that usually arises in this kind of situations, how to balance this, security and flexibility or user convenience or experience. Yeah, is there a way to do this that like all parties are happy? Yeah, so that it's secure and flexible and easy to use at the same time.
Of course, this is a very good question. The problem is that we have a very bad reputation, like IT and security in general. Like we have a very reputation. People really, in most companies, they don't want to talk to you.
It's like they always make problems,
and they see you as the team or the organization creating problems for the company. You don't want us.
We want to move forward, and they just
fast
move their.
We want to move fast, and you are making us go so slow. So I think that there's a fundamental concept that needs to be established first. IT and security work for the company, so you need to basically consider everyone in the company as your customer. And it feels like a very small thing, right? But when you start, I remember at the start stressing my team, like people in this company, the employees are our customers. And the thing is that it changes the dynamic because most of the traditional IT teams, even in companies I worked before, like they are seen as the position of authority, like you depend on me, I tell you what to do. It's because I say so that you need to do it this way. But if you start to think about the employees as your customers, then your success depends from the satisfaction of your customer. And so you need to understand what are the problems that your customers need to solve, and how things should work in their eyes, what kind of experience they expect, etc. And at Intercom, this was very important because people expected to move fast and to be able to do basically whatever they wanted on their laptops. I want to have access to the console. I want to install all the developer tools I want. I don't want to wait for you to install something on my laptop. I want to be an administrator, right? And so we kind of have to figure out a way to allow some of that to stay, but still keep them secure,
Okay, so what's the golden solution to this? Is it to have some constraints, but as you said, just with a wider access, or maybe some kind of monitoring of what the developers are doing?
The most important thing is to take in all those needs, and those are your requirements, right? And then you develop a solution.
So my requirements, I want to have an admin access.
Yeah,
and do anything I want.
I'm getting there. Well, if you worked at Intercom, you will be admin on your laptop. Which, like, yes. So let me get to how we got there. And you get all those requirements, and then you develop a threat model. And in the threat model, you need to decide what are the important things that I want to block here, or the ones that maybe I just want to observe, right? So the first thing there is build observability. So we spent a lot of time building observability on the laptops, because when you don't have on the user devices, because when you don't have a perimeter, the last line of defense is the user themselves and their device, right? So like we just want to know, we are not going to block anything by default. We just want to know what's going on. And so we deployed agents, we deployed observability, we deployed anti-malwares, management software, and just observed what's going on here. People fundamentally, they don't do anything wrong with their devices. So like it's I know that I just said zero.
Mining bitcoins, no? Happened to me.
You would be surprised. But they don't want to do anything wrong, like inherently the employee doesn't want to do anything wrong on their laptop,
But sometimes they may not be aware of the threats.
Yeah, they're not, most of them, they're not aware. The fact that you are a developer and that you know how to write code, or you are great at building infrastructure, doesn't give you the awareness of our field, like what the things you are doing, the implication of the things you are doing in terms of security,
Exactly.
etc.
Like nowadays using ChatGPT and feeding it with some company
Corporate data.
Right?
Yeah, there are solutions for that.
Even Samsung couldn't avoid that.
There's ChatGPT Enterprise. So like pay more money and make sure that they don't use your data to train the model.
This is heritable.
That's how it works. You create the problem and then you sell the solution.
Exactly. For money.
Yeah, of course. It's very common in the industry. So we deployed a lot of observability tools, and then we started to say, okay, this kind of thing is not great, so we should block it. But every time we made a change, we would spend a lot of time explaining people why we were making the change, try to make them understand, why this is good. Like I remember so many discussions where we introduced the two-factor authentication, and like people say, oh, this is gonna make me so slow, that I every time I will have to use two-factor. So like there are several ways to do that, right? You could require it at every authentication, that's mad. Or you could find you could see how it's going, how people use the systems, and then find maybe a session length that makes more sense.
Did you go through hardware tokens?
No, I'm not a strong believer in hardware tokens. I believe more in biometric factors. So.
Oh, I love it.
So we and also you can be very granular. Like you don't have to blanket apply one policy to every system. In Intercom for a very long time we had a classification of systems based on tiers. So tier 1, 2, 3, and tier 1 is the most sensitive system. So like for each tier you would apply different policies. So or inside the tier, as for privileged accounts, like you're a super admin. So as a super admin, I'm sorry, you can only identify from managed machines. You need to have a biometric factor plus possession all the time. Like but this way, you kind of like try to implement the least friction possible, right? You are gonna have to introduce some friction, but at least it's not a blanket, like in the old corporate ways. Like from today we deployed this antivirus, this firewall, nobody can go online. Like that's a very blanket policy.
And it's like top-down communication.
Yeah, it's really like that's how it's gonna be. That's how it's gonna be because we don't want to deal with the problems. And of course, our approach, it takes much more effort. It takes much more work. But my team loves the fact that, like, of course, we have our confrontations in our company about some of the policies, etc. But we love the fact that in general we are very liked, and people see us as approachable. They can discuss with us if we deploy a policy, they don't agree with it. We are available to discuss and find a compromise. Like it's just like I always think about what my actual manager, told me when I was promoted in a leadership role, and they say like your job is not really to know everything, or your job is to find a way to work together. Like no drama, just find a way to work together. Find a way to make things work across the business. You need to be an enabler, not a blocker. And sometimes it's really hard. You walk a fine line, right? And it's definitely more work than say, peace of mind. I'm just going to block everything. And there are some projects sometimes where we kind of like fall into that. When we were talking, for example, about blocking Chrome extensions, the easy way is let's block everything and then let people ask what they want enabled. But there's people that have been working with some Chrome extensions for years. So, and then we went back and said, okay, no, we're going to spend a few months a year to observe what extensions people use. We have that data. We're going to go through the data and see what people use, what is good, what is not, etc.
And that's actually very interesting. Yeah. So once you get the list, you need to somehow verify which extensions are secure. And I have no experience actually with that. How do you do this? How do you verify if an extension is secure?
So Google classifies extensions and tells you which permissions the extension requires. And this is all very documented. Google gives a list. This permission gives you this
Android
gives you these capabilities. So, and there are some tools like CRX, Excavator, etc. So it's all public. There's no easy way to do it. I wish that there was a tool that would just tell you.
Exactly.
Yeah. And there's some work going on from that perspective. Some very early solutions, a couple of startups still that are working on it. But there's nothing that you can just deploy. So you get the list, and then you extract. You build something to extract the permissions, and then you get a list with all the extensions, the permissions that you create a spreadsheet, which is basically what it is.
But still, I mean, you got, I don't know, some
thousands of extensions.
Of course, but you got an extension that, I don't know, does something with clipboard. You can expect it should use clipboard, and then you see a permission to microphone and camera, yeah? But what's next? How do you make a decision?
You need to, as usual, build a threat model. Go through all the permissions and decide which ones are the non-negotiable.
So you do this manually?
At the start, yeah, it's a lot of research. Like nothing. If you want to live by least friction possible,
yeah,
you need to put in a lot of work. And most of the work is actually research. And that's usually how we do things. So it takes us a long time to deploy a solution, to build a deployed solution, because we do the research to build the threat model. And in case of the Chrome extensions, you just basically go through all the permissions available, and then you decide which ones are the non-negotiable. For me, for example, a non-negotiable one is extension that can modify the content of a page, any page. Like that's really bad. That's really bad because like it's
swapping the account number.
Because the extension actually could even be non-malicious. Maybe it's developed to give you some additional functionality on Google Meets, for example. But what happens if that extension, if there's usually one single guy, it's not even a company, developing that extension. What happens if he gets breached and somebody malicious start to add code?
It's an open source that gets modified. No one.
You never know. So like that's it's definitely a challenge.
Okay. All right. And like, what do you think? Because my notice is that also security is becoming more ubiquitous. So not like straight in the face being a blocker, like you said. And I see like a huge improvement from the old days where everything was blocked, like hardware tokens. And where do you think we are now with the security, and how do you see a future of this? Yeah, what changes are coming?
Well, security is a huge field. Like I'm gonna assume we're talking about corporate security.
Yes, of course.
So I think that now everybody knows what zero trust is. At least almost everybody knows what zero trust is. Knows what the zero trust architecture is like. It's a really hard change to make, and a lot of companies are still mostly like on-prem infrastructure. So I see a lot of roles now being created for people to do all this digital transformation or transition to the cloud. And I think definitely there's going to be some industries are going to take time, like we were talking about banking, for example. There are standards that are hard to change there. I don't see any change happening anytime soon about PCI compliance. It's going to evolve. They're going to up the cryptographic requirements. They're going to up the restrictions inside of your network and your environment, but they're not going to embrace a fundamental change. But I do think that being the attacks today to corporate environments being so sophisticated, people will have to adapt to zero trust. It doesn't matter if you are in the cloud or if you are on-prem. You just need to adapt to that, because moving to the cloud is actually in itself not a solution. You could implement Okta and move your perimeter to the cloud, but then you don't implement any zero trust.
Yeah, and
You
it's
just
like
You just move the perimeter.
level security.
You just move the perimeter there. So you need to the big thing, which we've been doing it for a while now. It's basically using several different factors, using behaviors. So basically, using possession factors, like something that you have, using biometric factors, something you are.
Other behaviors, that I'm really curious. What's that?
The behavior is like, let me give you a very easy example that is actually very used across the industry. Let's say they call them Superman authentication. Let's say that you authenticate in the space of 10 seconds from Barca and from New York. That's actually not humanly possible. That's why they call it Superman authentication, right? It's a nice funny term, and that's a behavior, right? That's not supposed to happen. Another example I can give you that happened, that we were having an event in Dublin, and there was this executive assistant that was given 2 temporary laptops for audio-video reasons, to present the slides, etc. And one laptop had the Dublin time zone, and the other laptop had the San Francisco time zone. So it looked like, to our infrastructure, it looked like she authenticated from 2 different time zones in like 5 seconds, because she authenticated at the same time on both laptops, and their account was locked. Like she called, I don't know, why is this happening?
Okay, and that's really interesting. So I'm not sure how you manage it, but I believe you can manage or implement it either way. Either you have some rule-based engine that you have some algorithms that detect this. But I can see a great application for machine learning. Yeah, so like anomaly detection. Is it actually a thing? Are there tools doing that?
It is a thing.
Okay.
So this is functionality that Okta had for a while. This kind of like behavior detection. There are some pre-made rules that they suggest to you. You can create your own ones. And at the last Octane in October, actually they presented some of the features that are coming that are AI based, because actually AI is very good for that. That they can feed all this data to the AI and understand which behaviors are actually the ones that you should block. They cannot just they're not just gonna ingest behavior data, but also they're gonna ingest what successful companies actually set, like what kind of rules, what kind of policies you create to see the ones that work best. And one of the interesting features to basically suggest Okta admins what rules, use the AI to suggest what rules, what policies to implement.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
definitely
like a hybrid of those two.
That's definitely I can see somebody maybe at some point developing their own model just for this, for behavioral security.
But it should be quite universal, in my opinion. You could have some, I don't know, like APMs have, yeah? So they get through the logs, every activity of the application, log in, log out, and then you could have some anomaly detector that sees something suspicious, yeah?
You can do that by yourself already. That's been available for a very long time. You can use a platform, for example, like Panther, to ingest all your logs. And then you can create some rules to detect the behaviors, But see, this is the thing. You can only create policies and rules and alerts for the things that you expect, right? Okay. What about the unexpected?
Exactly.
And that's where something like a model, an AI model, machine learning model for security, focused on these things, could come in. To kind of anticipate the unexpected, right? Because everything we create, every alert, every policy is based on things that we know or we expect. It's based on what keeps us awake at night. What are your worst nightmares as an IT security person? Right?
Exactly. You briefly mentioned about, let's say that before implementing or during implementation of some new policies or security standards, you communicate with your users, and this is actually something that I've historically found probably the most hated kind of trainings. I mean, security trainings are usually not very liked across an enterprise. I mean, how do you educate the users in such a way that it's not a must-have that they need to do? It's something that they actually benefit from.
Yeah, you need to every time that there's a project like this that fundamentally changes the user experience. As part of the project, we develop a comms plan, and as a part of the comms plan, there is of course like the explanation of why we are doing this. And the most important thing is to actually explain what kind of advantages this is bringing. Why is this good for you, right? Like sometimes a little bit more work for you, but so much more security and peace of mind.
And you also get what you get out of this is awareness. So if people are aware of the threats and how you solve it, then they are more cautious later on, right?
But look, we are not perfect. Like I'm not saying that we always ace at this. I'm not saying that like, oh, we always do it perfect. Sometimes we really mess up, and
maybe you can give an example.
Oh, we make some changes.
This show is all about this.
Yeah, so I can tell you one. Like we implemented some changes where we were forcing biometric authentication for everyone. Like before it wasn't a requirement for everything, but there were some attacks, some phishing attacks where people were actually successful to fatigue someone and tell them they were from IT and give them their MFA token on a call or on a chat and authenticate. And we are very good at blocking these on have it really happen. But when we say like, okay, you know what, like we can stop this by forcing biometric authentication. So enrollment of the biometric factors, which in itself is a very tight process. So it's not like you can just you have Touch ID on your MacBook or Face ID or fingerprint on your device that you can use it. No. Those devices need to be enrolled. And in order to enroll them, you need a device that is already enrolled, etc. So it's a bit more complex. But plus, like, it's something that like breaks this kind of threats, prevents this kind of threats. And we made the change very fast during an incident because like that's called incident response, right? You just need to move fast. But I think we could have done a better job communicating after why we did this. And we did it later. We actually wrote a very nice story of like how the attack happened and the changes we made, etc. But some users were really surprised because, before I could access this system, which is deemed not sensitive, just by logging in with the username, password, and MFA. And now I can't do it anymore. I can't use the computers at my mom's house to check my emails, for example. Like I can't do that anymore. And this is this is making me slow. I always need to bring around my device, etc., etc. And they were surprised by this change. We didn't communicate it well, and so we had to, go back and learn and explain people why we did it. And the thing is that after you explain people, even leaders, some very senior people may come to you and complain about something. If you explain to them why you are doing it and the advantages that it brings, they're actually very receptive. Because in the end, they are also responsible for the success of the company. Because, it's not caring about security is not caring about the data of your customers, which at the same time is not caring about your customers. And it's really, everybody knows that it's really hard to gain trust as a company. As a new company, you start on the market.
Very easy to lose it, though.
Yeah, it's the first thing that you think is like, I just need to, go out in the market, build some trust. And when people see that customers trust me, I'm going to get more customers. But then that trust, you can lose it in 5 seconds.
Exactly. Okay, one is topic not directly related to security or infrastructure. You mentioned that you're doing like machine learning AI at Intercom. I mean, not you personally, but the company.
Me personally, yeah.
Could you potentially like compare, because there is a discussion around cost of infrastructure for machine learning models, training machine learning models. Do you have any experience? And very often it's saying that cloud is incredibly expensive. Do you have any experience working both on on-prem infrastructure as well as cloud for machine learning?
Right now, most people, in terms of machine learning, use the models that already exist.
Of course, but if someone needs to train their own,
Yeah, but it's really, as you said, it's really expensive. Like I think they, as the models grow, like now, for example, if you wanted to have something comparable to ChatGPT, you will have to spend so much money to train and arrive at that level. I think that in general, like having the base model is not complex to write, right? It's just like the training that is really expensive. And so I don't
this
see
is what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I don't see like this being available to many companies if you want to compete. I think for the foreseeable future, I still see people using OpenAI, the OpenAI platform, either through OpenAI themselves or through the models that are available to Azure, for example, or
That you can just tailor to your needs by.
Yeah, and you can just like there are several ways that you can use them, and there are, as I said, there are contracts in place that you can have with guarantees that they're not going to use your data to train the model. Even for ChatGPT, for example, the problem you mentioned, there's a version of ChatGPT is called ChatGPT Enterprise, and one of the things that you sign for is that you pay more money, but they're not going to use the data, your data, to train the model. And it's the same with Google. Google has a version of their AI that is called Duet AI for Google Workspace that add AI functions into Google Workspace applications. And one of the things they say, as for anything Google Workspace, actually, they don't use your data to train the model. And Google Workspace has always been like this. Even if you have a personal Google Workspace for your own personal domain, for example, you can notice that there are a lot of Google services that you cannot use on a Workspace account, simply because the data that is inside the Workspace cannot be used to train the model, right?
All right. And looking forward in the future, what do you see as the biggest threat or the new kind of attacks or threats that may change like the industry? And I'm asking specifically, today before you came, I was making a an avatar of myself.
Yes.
And it's so bloody good. Yeah, I mean, I believe there is a lot of people who wouldn't tell a difference between me and the avatar. And it just needed a 2-minute video in order to create a perfect copy of me. Yeah, and this is one of the biggest threats I can see, especially my parents would never assume that it's possible. So they would see, oh, yeah, their son is calling and it looks like him. So yeah, we trust him like 100%. Yeah. And then how, this is one of the threats I see, but maybe, there are more that you see, and how to prevent this. Yeah. How to defend against it.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's not just about corporate security here. For example, you were talking about avatar, but there are easier things to do. They could record the sample of your voice and then
just give you a call,
train an AI to speak with
give me
you.
a password to you,
and you call your parents and you tell them to transfer you 20,000 euros on a bank account.
Exactly.
How do you do that, and how do you prevent that? And that's only through education, right? There's nothing else you can do at the moment. Would you prevent that specific case, for example? They have your number.
Exactly.
So they can actually call you and verify, are you actually asking me?
Actually, spoofing a cell phone number is incredibly easy.
I know, but that's just verify, always trust but verify. That's the thing. But in terms of corporate security, the problem, the threat that I see is the industry itself, right? Like we are talking about zero trust, we are talking about multi-factor authentication, device trust, biometric, etc. But the reality is that most of the industry is really behind. When the threats are becoming so sophisticated, you just cannot afford to be behind. Many times I heard, my company is very small, and so I don't want to spend too much on security. I'll think about it later, but later may be too late.
Mm-hmm.
And so even talking about Okta and the ecosystem, right? There are a lot of very nice features there. Single sign-on, which everybody knows. It's to centralize authentication through an identity provider. There's a scheme that is for provisioning and deprovisioning. And Okta, for example, launched that Octane Universal Logout, which means that you can hypothetically click on a profile and make them log out in all the applications. And this is all nice and great. Those are all great standards. But there are a couple of problems there. One, a lot of the SaaS applications don't support it. Like it's especially scheme provisioning, like it's something that is really, really rare. Not so many products support it because there's a cost of implementation, right? And single sign-on as well is most of the time behind a tax. There's actually a very nice website you can Google. It's called SSO Tax, where this person, like me, is very upset about single sign-on not being available by default in all products. And he created a list of all the SaaS products and showing you how much it's going to cost you to have single sign-on enabled, right? It's always behind the enterprise tier, which if you are a small company, you can't afford. So you end up not having single sign-on behind the identity provider because it costs too much to have it. Like, it should be one of those things available to everyone, like an ID card, right? So like there's one thing, like the standards are not implemented universally. So while there are tools for you to use those standards and implement good security, not all the tools, even at Intercom, not all the tools that we use support single sign-on or provisioning of the provision. And then the other problem is there are some intrinsic problems that the industry created. For example, like how do you connect to different systems to each other? Before you will use human accounts, right?
Yes.
So like I'm the administrator, I'm gonna connect Google Workspace to this add-on with my account. But then what happens is that like I leave the company or something changes in my permissions. Let's say somebody decided to implement the least privilege, which is the right thing to do. And so very few people are going to be super admins, or maybe even just one account is going to be super admin. Everybody needs to ask for permission to use it. And so suddenly all your infrastructure is going to crumble, right? So the industry introduced the concept of service accounts. And that's a very, it's a declared the best practice. Even if you ask Okta, how do I connect all my systems to Okta? And they say the best practice is you go in the system you want to connect, you create a super admin service account, that's the permission. Depends if super admin is what you need, but basically an admin account, that's the permission to authenticate and create this connection. And a lot of those service accounts are actually shared across the company. And because of the nature of the business, move fast. Most of the time, you cannot put these accounts behind device trust or behind biometric authentication because maybe 10 different people, 20 different people need to use that account. And that's a big problem. And right now, there are basically no tools to solve this. I mean, we have a solution in place.
What was the solution?
The solution we had in place, we used a platform called Tines, which is a no-code platform, which was born actually to solve security problems, eliminate toil, like alert fatigue, so you can automate processes without writing code, basically. And what we did is that we built, through this platform, we built a web application where all our service accounts are actually blocked by default. You can't log into a service account. You need to use your human account, your personal one, your identity to log in and pass all the checks, biometric, device trust, etc. And then once you are logged into this application, you can choose the service account you want to use, specify a reason, the amount of time you want to unblock it. Everything is documented, so gets unblocked, let's say, for 10 minutes, and then you can log in and you can use it.
Does it work with Azure, for instance? Azure exploits service accounts heavily.
Oh yeah, I know. But if Azure is behind Okta, yes, you can do that. Yeah. But you can use Azure as an identity provider as well. I'm sure that if Azure was our identity provider, we could probably develop something for Azure. It's an in-house, a very flexible solution, but it's a patch, right? Like in reality,
it's not by design.
It's not by design. Like this should be something that a platform like Okta should have a solution for. And as I said, we are very close with their product managers, so we've been talking to them. We said, you need a solution for this. This is a disaster waiting to happen. And funny enough, the last public incident that Okta had was through a service account. And the service account wasn't protected even by MFA, and it was saved in the Google Password Manager of an employee on that personal account.
But it's like the user layer of accessing service accounts, but there is also like an application layer, because very often applications use service accounts. Sometimes they are let's say the credentials are not stored in the proper way, right? So it's another threat that.
That's a failure on how you designed the integration, because the integration shouldn't use, for example, username and password. The best way to design an integration is through OAuth tokens. So what happens is that you authenticate one time, you generate an OAuth token that connects the two systems together, and that's valid only for that. Can't be used for anything else, right? The problem is that most of the time, not most of the time, many times, most of the time would be a big assumption. Many times, these integrations are used, maybe username and password in clear, or even just the password is saved somewhere, in a software. And like, for example, in this case of that incident, Google Password Manager is not insecure. It's all encrypted through your Google personal identity. But the fact that it's very much easier to exploit breach the personal identity of an employee, and then the fact that this employee had this company credential saved in their password manager, that's the problem, right? Because it was a service account. A lot of people needed to use it, and so couldn't be protected properly, and that's a problem. Yeah. And so I would expect identity providers and platforms like Okta to come with the solution. Like I said, we have some suggestion on what the solution should look like, but in the end, like as leaders in the industry, you would expect them to lead and to find a solution to that. And this is actually a problem that is not talked much. And I know that there are some people in the industry trying to find a solution to this. And there are even one startup in stealth, especially, that I know, that is trying to find a solution for non-human accounts, because it is, I think, one of the biggest vulnerabilities. Like, that's what really keeps me awake at night. I think about those all the time, and you can put observability, as we said. You can build alarms. You can we have this very sensitive service account, so as soon as somebody logs into it, we have an alarm firing up because it's not normal. There must be a reason, and so it opens an alert. Somebody needs to go in there and say, "Hey, did you use this? Like, what this was used for?" And if there isn't, there are an SLA. Like, if nobody replies, like in a few seconds or in a minute, we just block that account,
Okay.
right? And of course, like, you always need to think about those threats, and there are things that you can do to minimize the impact. Like one of the assumptions of zero trust, now there's a lot of talk about zero trust security, for example, and segmentation. What segmentation is, just to explain it very easy, is that you divide your infrastructure in segments, right? So to limit the lateral movement. Because what happens is that you breach one system, and then if you didn't consider the possibility of lateral movement, then they can freely move across your infrastructure. If you segment your infrastructure, then if they breach one service, they can't automatically move to all the rest. This is a very simplified way to explain it, but that's the idea. And that's one of the things you can do. Like, if they ever breach a system, just make sure that they can access the least possible amount. And that's like of information and data. Like, this is the concept, the very known concept of managing privileged access and giving like least privilege possible.
It's like damage control as well.
Yeah, and it starts with basically giving people only the permissions they need to do their job. And sometimes not
only people, also like the applications, and
sometimes not even just the permission they need to do their job, but just to give them for the time that they need it for. Like, it can be as granular as that, like, for example, I can be a basic user in a financial software, but in order to modify some invoices, for example, I need this IGER permission, and instead of having it all the time, there's a system where I need to request it. And then there's an automated approval.
You get a time window. You can...
Yeah, somebody that can an approver gets an alert, and they need to go there, and they see the business reason. Okay, this looks legit. This looks reasonable. He's asking for this access for 30 minutes. You approve it, and then for 30 minutes they can have that access and do their job, etc. So, like, there's a lot of tools that you can put in place to kind of like prevent. But this is, as we said, only for the threats, right?
All right, I think we could talk for hours about this topic.
We could talk for days.
We could talk for days.
I'm actually being very high level on purpose, because
yes, if we went into details, it would take like a few hours at least. All right, Emanuele, I suggest we do another round. If we get some questions from the audience that you could potentially answer. But many thanks for coming over. It's been a great conversation, really great insights that many I wasn't aware of. So I hope the same for our viewers. And yeah, I hope we speak again.
Was happy to be here, and always happy to talk about it.
Awesome.
Sharing their experience from tech leaders to tech leaders.